Welcome to Wisdom for the Present, where we take ancient truth and bring it into clear, modern understanding. This episode uses AI-generated narration based on human-researched and written material.
Glad to be here, diving into this.
So I want you to imagine opening a sealed, dusty room in a synagogue in Egypt. You step inside, holding a lantern, and you're just immediately staring at a literal mountain of forgotten papers.
It's a massive pile.
Yeah, we're talking about hundreds of thousands of parchment and papyrus fragments that just haven't seen the sun in, 1,000 years.
Right, it's wild.
And for centuries, an entire book of ancient wisdom, the original Hebrew text of a scribe named Ben-Sira, was thought to be completely wiped from the face of the earth, like poof. Gone.
Which is, it's crazy to think about losing a whole book like that.
Exactly. Scholars only knew it existed because of some later Greek translations. But then in 1896, a scholar walks into this dusty storage room and basically hears a literal voice from the ancient dust.
It is genuinely one of the most thrilling moments in the history of biblical archaeology.
Oh, I bet.
Because, we like to imagine ancient texts as these immaculate sterile monoliths of pure thought that have just been, handed down to us on a velvet pillow.
Right, like they fell out of the sky.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But the reality of how we get our history is so much messier, highly contested, and deeply, beautifully human.
And that messy humanity is exactly what we are wading into today, because our mission is to act as your guides through a really fascinating, complex, and sometimes kind of jarring piece of ancient literature.
Which is chapters 25 through 43 of the Apocrypha book of Sirach.
Right, also known as Ecclesiasticus. We really want to help you extract the practical wisdom, the moral insight, and the modern life application from this 2nd century BC text, while also, navigating its more difficult cultural baggage.
And there is definitely some baggage to unpack.
Oh, for sure. But before we get into the actual life advice, I have to know more about this hidden room in Egypt. Like, how does a lost book just show up in a pile of paper?
So to understand that, we have to understand the concept of a geniza.
Okay, a geniza.
Yeah. In Jewish tradition, there's this deep, profound reverence for the written name of God.
Right.
If a document, a scroll, or even just a casual letter contains the divine name, it cannot simply be thrown away in the trash when it gets old or worn out.
So it's a structural reverence. You don't just toss the sacred into the garbage with yesterday's dinner.
Exactly. Has to be respectfully retired, almost like a burial. So synagogues would build these specific, sometimes hidden storage rooms called genizas.
Which means what exactly?
The word essentially implies a hiding place, or a repository.
Yeah.
When a text was no longer usable, it went into the geniza.
So it just sits there.
Right. Now, normally, these documents would eventually decay and return to the earth, just naturally. But the geniza at the Ben-Sira synagogue in Old Cairo had a massive advantage.
The dry Egyptian climate.
You guessed it. The climate was perfect for preservation. For over a millennium, the community just kept tossing documents into this room.
And it wasn't just scriptures, right?
Not at all. It was marriage contracts, business letters, shopping lists, and legal disputes.
Wow, so it's basically an accidental time capsule of 1,000 years of human existence.
That is literally a perfect way to describe it. It was a cross-section of daily life. And in the late 19th century, a scholar from Cambridge named Solomon Schechter realized the unparalleled value of this room.
He must have lost his mind when he saw it.
Oh, he absolutely did. He essentially convinced the local authorities to let him cart away the contents. We are talking about 250,000 fragments.
250,000. That's a staggering number.
Right. And as scholars started painstakingly sorting through this unimaginable jigsaw puzzle of history, they found something impossible.
The lost Hebrew original of the book of Sirach.
Exactly. Fragments of it just sitting there in the pile.
It's the ultimate needle in a haystack. But let's ground this for a second. Who actually wrote the book? Who is the man behind this voice calling out from the Cairo dust?
Well, the author is a man named Jesus Ben-Sira, often just called Ben-Sira. And he was writing in Jerusalem roughly around 180 to 175 BC.
Got it.
And this date is incredibly important because he is sitting right at the precipice of a massive cultural collision.
What kind of collision? What was happening?
He's writing right before the Maccabean Revolt, during a period when the massive sweeping force of Greek culture Hellenism is just crashing into the traditional Jewish world.
Okay, I want to pause here because Hellenism is one of those academic words that gets thrown around and it can sound, very abstract.
Right, it sounds like a textbook term.
Yeah. So imagine living in traditional Jerusalem at this time. What does Hellenism actually look and feel like on the ground for an average person?
That is a great question. Hellenism wasn't just some high-level philosophy. It was the total globalization of the ancient world, basically courtesy of the aftermath of Alexander the Great's conquests.
Like ancient pop culture taking over.
Exactly. On the ground in Jerusalem, it meant you suddenly had young men wanting to participate in Greek-style gymnasiums.
Which involved what, exactly?
Well, it involved exercising naked, for one.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, which was a massive, massive scandal in traditional Jewish culture.
I can imagine.
It also meant Greek clothing styles, Greek political structures, and Greek social networking events, like the Symposium, which was a formalized wine and philosophy banquet.
Oh, right, the famous Greek Symposium.
Yeah, and Greek just became the language of commerce and the language of the educated elite.
So it's like a tidal wave of foreign pop culture, economics, and philosophy washing over a highly traditional, localized society.
Yes, a total culture shock.
So you either adapt and assimilate, or you build a wall to keep it out.
Precisely. And Ben-Sira is a professional scribe, a teacher, and a really keen observer of human nature, trying to navigate this exact tension.
He wasn't just some monk living in a cave somewhere, right?
Not at all. He was a highly educated, well-traveled man of the world. He actually writes that he served among great men and appeared before princes.
Oh, so he had access to power.
Very much so. He traveled through the lands of foreign peoples to test the good and evil among men.
He also mentions surviving a near-death experience, right? Something involving a political crisis.
Yes. He writes about being in danger even unto death because of slander.
Slander. Just words.
Just words. He was likely caught up in some severe court intrigue, perhaps falsely accused before a foreign ruler, and was only narrowly preserved.
That's terrifying.
And that terrifying experience of almost losing his life to a lie deeply, deeply shaped his views on how incredibly dangerous human speech can be.
Because he knew firsthand that words are not just air.
Right, they are weapons.
So we have this incredibly worldly, seasoned scribe writing down his life's wisdom in Hebrew for his students in Jerusalem. But how did it end up lost, and how did it end up in Greek?
Well, after Ben-Sira dies, his grandson eventually travels to Egypt around 132 BC.
Okay, to Alexandria, right.
Yes, and Alexandria had a massive, thriving Jewish population, but most of them no longer spoke Hebrew.
Because of the Hellenism.
Exactly. They spoke Greek, the language of the empire. So the grandson takes his grandfather's Hebrew scroll and translates it into Greek.
Specifically, so these modernized Greek-speaking Jews can access their own ancestral wisdom.
You got it. He even includes a prologue apologizing if his translation doesn't quite capture the punchiness of the original Hebrew.
I love that so much, the age-old translator's dilemma, like, sorry if the jokes don't land in Greek, guys, I really tried.
Yeah, it's very relatable.
But here is where the story of this text takes a really sharp, almost bizarre turn. You mentioned earlier that historical texts aren't sterile. They are contested.
Highly contested.
And the book of Sirach basically becomes the center of a massive theological turf war.
A literal war in the margins of the manuscript.
Which is wild.
To understand why, we have to look at the religious factions that were solidifying in the decades after Ben-Sira wrote. You primarily have the Sadducees and the Pharisees.
Let's break those down because they feature so heavily in ancient history, but their actual beliefs can be kind of confusing for people today.
Absolutely.
Ben-Sira himself was aligned with what we would call a Sadducean worldview, right? What does that actually mean?
So, broadly speaking, the Sadducees were the aristocratic, priestly class in Jerusalem. They were the old guard.
The establishment.
Exactly. And theologically, they were fiercely conservative in a very specific way. They believed only the written law of Moses, the first 5 books of the Bible, was strictly authoritative.
Okay, so just the Torah.
Right. And because of this, they rejected a lot of newer theological concepts that were bubbling up at the time.
Like what?
Well, they did not believe in the resurrection of the dead at the end of time, for instance.
Wow, really?
Yeah, they held to the much older traditional view of Sheol, which is a kind of shadowy, neutral underworld where everyone goes when they die, good or bad.
Oh, so for a Sadducee, the stakes are entirely in this life. You do good now because there is no grand cosmic courtroom in the sky waiting to reward you after you die.
Exactly. The focus is entirely present tense. They also didn't emphasize angels or demons, and they were staunch advocates of human free will.
Meaning you are in control of your own destiny.
Right. They rejected the idea that some divine fate or providence meticulously controlled every human action. If you made a mistake, it was entirely on you.
So Ben-Sira writes his book from that perspective. It is extremely practical. It is intensely focused on the here and now, and it heavily emphasizes personal responsibility.
Yes, very pragmatic.
But the book becomes a bestseller. Everyone loves his practical advice. And eventually, the rival faction, the Pharisees, rises to prominence and becomes the dominant cultural force.
And the Pharisees, as you might guess, have a radically different theology.
Wow, I'm sure.
They believe deeply in the resurrection of the dead. They believe in a vibrant spiritual world of angels and divine providence actively governing history.
So the exact opposite of the Sadducees.
Pretty much. They also place a massive emphasis on personal piety concepts like intense repentance, regular prayer, and almsgiving as ways to earn merit with God.
Okay, I'm trying to put myself in the shoes of a Pharisee scribe here. I love Ben-Sira's book because his advice on how to run a business and how to treat my friends is just spot on.
Right, it's great advice.
But his theology is making me crazy. He never mentions the afterlife. He doesn't talk about repentance. So what do? Do they ban the book?
No, they don't ban it. They literally edit it.
They just edit it.
Yeah, they retrofit Ben-Sira to make him sound like a Pharisee.
Wait. I'm struggling to visualize how this actually happens. Today, if I don't like a book, I can't just change the printed text in everyone else's copy. How did an ancient scribe physically change the theology of a widely read book?
It happens through the mechanics of hand copying manuscripts.
Okay, walk me through it.
Imagine a Pharisee scribe sitting in a room, copying the book of Sirach onto a fresh piece of vellum or papyrus. He comes across a verse where Ben-Sira says, God created human beings.
Standard stuff.
Right. But the Pharisee scribe thinks, well, yes, but Ben-Sira forgot the most important part, that God created us for eternal life.
I see where this is going.
So the scribe might add a note in the margin of his copy, kind of like an ancient sticky note, just clarifying the theology. He writes in the margin, and they who do the things that are pleasing unto him shall pluck the fruit of the tree of immortality.
Okay, so it starts as just a margin note, a commentary.
Right. Innocent enough. But fast forward 50 years, the next scribe is copying that manuscript.
And he sees the margin note.
He sees the note in the margin, and he assumes the previous scribe accidentally left out a sentence and squeezed it into the margin to fix the mistake.
Oh, wow.
So the new scribe writes that sentence directly into the main body of the text. Boom. The theology has officially been rewritten.
That is wild. It's like an ancient slow-motion Wikipedia edit war.
That is exactly what it is.
You know how you can go to a Wikipedia article on a controversial political figure, click the history tab, and just see two rival factions just deleting and rewriting each other's paragraphs all day long?
Oh, yeah.
He was a hero, delete. He was a villain, delete. That is what is happening to this sacred text.
And the sources show us fantastic examples of this. Ben-Sira will write a harsh truth about how a sinner gets no thanks. A later Pharisee editor, obsessed with the concept of repentance, intercepts the text and inserts a line saying how good it is when he who is reproved manifesteth repentance.
They are literally injecting their own theological watchwords into a dead man's mouth.
Yes, trying to claim him for their side.
But hold on, I have to challenge this. If we know the text was systematically tampered with by rival factions injecting their own agendas over centuries, how do we know what the true wisdom is?
It's a very valid question.
Like, how can we trust anything in the book? Why even read it if it's just a patchwork of competing propaganda?
Well, that is exactly why the Cairo-Geniza discovery was a monumental earthquake for scholars.
Because it gave them the older version.
Exactly. Before 1896, we only had the later, heavily edited Greek and Syriac translations. But by recovering the older Hebrew fragments from the Geniza, scholars could employ textual criticism.
They could compare them.
Right. They could lay the documents side by side and physically peel back the layers of history. They could see the original foundation, and they could identify the secondary additions made by the Pharisees.
So we can actually separate the primary Ben-Sira from the secondary editors?
We can. But on a deeper philosophical level, this history teaches us something vital about how ancient people viewed wisdom.
What do you mean?
They didn't see a text as a fragile, dead artifact locked behind glass in a museum. They saw it as a living, breathing dialogue.
Oh, that's interesting.
The text was an active conversation across centuries. The scribes who added to it weren't trying to maliciously forge something. They genuinely believed they were participating in the unfolding of divine truth.
That is a fascinating reframing. It's not a forgery. It's a multi-generational conversation.
Exactly.
And what's incredible is that despite all that high-level theological bickering about angels and the afterlife and the margins, There's one area where absolutely no one argued with Ben-Sira.
And what's that?
The editors left his practical, everyday observations on human behavior completely alone. Because his insight into how we handle our money and our mouths is so piercingly accurate, you can't really argue with it.
It is universally applicable. Which brings us to some of the most profound insights on speech and commerce in the entire ancient world, found in chapters 27 and 28.
Yeah, let me read this quote directly from the source, because the imagery he uses is just brilliant. Chapter 27, verse 2. As a nail sticketh fast between the joinings of the stones, so doth sin stick close between buying and selling.
It is a phenomenal architectural metaphor.
Really paints a picture.
Think about ancient masonry. When you are building a massive stone wall like the retaining walls of the Temple Mount in Jerusalem, you don't always use mortar.
Right.
The structural integrity of the wall depends entirely on the massive stones being carved perfectly flush. They have to rest completely flat against one another, distributing the immense weight evenly.
Right. Gravity and friction are holding the whole thing together.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Now, imagine a stray iron nail or a small wedge of wood gets accidentally jammed between two of those massive stones during construction.
It seems microscopic. It's just a tiny sliver.
But that nail prevents the stones from sitting flush. It creates a tiny gap.
And then what happens?
Over the years, rain gets in that gap.
Yeah.
In the winter, the water freezes and expands. The stones are subtly pushed further apart. The weight of the wall begins to distribute unevenly. Cracks form.
Wow.
And eventually, decades later, the entire wall suffers a catastrophic collapse, all because of one tiny hidden wedge.
And Ben-Sira is saying that commerce, the act of buying and selling, has this inherent, almost structural vulnerability to sin and deceit. The deceit is the nail.
Yes. He understood that an economy isn't just an exchange of coins for goods. An economy is a fragile network of human trust.
That's a great way to put it.
If you introduce deception into a transaction, you are driving a wedge into the structural integrity of your community. Yeah.
Let's translate that nail between the stones to 21st century realities, because he is basically diagnosing the inherent moral risks of modern capitalism here.
Oh, absolutely.
Think about how many nails we interact with daily. The fine print in a 50-page software terms of service agreement that nobody can read but everyone signs anyway.
Or hidden convenience fees that magically appear at the final stage of an online checkout.
Yes. Or planned obsolescence.
Oh, that's a big one.
When a tech company intentionally designs a phone battery to degrade after 18 months, or a printer to reject a third-party ink cartridge, just to force you into a constant cycle of purchasing.
It's infuriating.
That is the nail sticking fast between the buying and the selling. It is that tiny legally permissible wedge of deceit.
And it might boost quarterly profits temporarily.
Right. But over time, it creates a massive structural gap in consumer trust. Eventually, the public feels completely alienated and exploited by the very institutions that are supposed to serve them. The wall collapses.
And Ben-Sira applies this rigorous standard not just to corporate commerce, but to our daily human speech.
Yeah, how does he frame that?
He writes, "The furnace proveth the potter's vessels, so the trial of man is in his reasoning," or as some translations put it, in his speech.
That's another incredibly grounded metaphor.
It really is.
Because if you visit a potter's workshop, you see all these raw clay pots sitting on the table. They look perfectly symmetrical, smooth, and beautiful.
They look finished.
But you actually have absolutely no idea if a pot is any good while it is just sitting there. It might have microscopic air bubbles trapped in the clay. It might have a hidden structural flaw.
Right. You can't tell just by looking.
You only find out the truth when you put it into a 2,000-degree furnace. The fire proves the vessel. If there is a hidden bubble, the pot shatters in the heat.
And Ben-Sira is stating that you do not truly know a person's character when everything is calm.
When they're just sitting on the table, so to speak.
Exactly. You only know who someone is when they are put under immense pressure, the furnace of conflict, stress, or temptation, and they are forced to speak.
It's so true. I mean, anyone can sound wise and kind on a sunny Tuesday afternoon when everything is going well.
Yeah, that's easy.
But how do you speak when you are exhausted, financially stressed, and someone just insulted you?
That is the furnace.
That is when the hidden flaws in your character shatter the pot.
And we have to remember his personal context here. He survived a political crisis that almost cost him his head because of slander.
Right. He knew the stakes.
He knew that words have a physical kinetic energy. They create reality. They destroy lives.
He has this other metaphor about betrayal that just punches you in the gut. He talks about what happens when you betray a friend's secret.
The bird metaphor.
Yes. He says, As one that letteth a bird go out of his hand, so hast thou let thy neighbor go, and shalt not get him again. Follow after him no more, for he is too far off. He is as a roe escaped out of the snare.
The finality of that image is chilling.
It really is.
Imagine holding a wild bird in your cupped hands. You can feel its heartbeat. As long as your hands are closed, the bird is contained. The secret is safe.
But the absolute millisecond you relax your fingers and open your hand,
The bird launches into the sky. You cannot call it back. You cannot chase it down. It is gone forever. And Ben-Sira says the relationship is just as permanently, irrevocably gone.
we have to bring that escaped bird into the modern digital age. Because the speed at which we can release the bird today is terrifying.
It's instantaneous.
We all hold these private, vulnerable moments in our hands every day. A friend texts you a confession about their marriage. A coworker sends you a frustrated Slack message about the boss. Someone shares a private photo.
And the temptation to share it is always there.
But the second you hit forward, or the second you take a screenshot and drop it into a different group chat, you have opened your hand.
And digital permanence means the bird doesn't just fly away, it multiplies.
Exactly. You can delete the text later, you can apologize, but the screenshot is already in the wild. The trust is instantly annihilated.
It is like Ben-Sira diagnosed the exact pathology of social media gossip and digital betrayal 2,000 years before the internet was even conceived.
It's uncanny, but, this rigor brings up a significant obstacle.
I can see that.
If you are listening to this, you might feel a rising sense of anxiety. Ben-Sira leaves almost no room for error. He demands a terrifying level of hypervigilance over every single transaction and every casual conversation.
Right, it feels exhausting.
If every word is a potential nail in a wall or a bird escaping your hand, it can feel paralyzing. How do you even interact with the world without constantly fearing you are causing a structural collapse?
It's a fair pushback. You almost feel like you have to take a vow of silence and move to the woods.
Right.
But I think his strictness isn't meant to paralyze us. It's meant to slow us down. He's trying to protect us from the furnace.
How does he suggest we do that?
He provides a mechanism for this. He says, as when one sifteth with a sieve, the refuse remaineth. So the filth of man in his talk.
Okay, the sieve. So how do we use that today?
We'll think about the sieve practice as a mental filter rather than a paralyzing fear.
Okay.
Before you speak, especially in a moment of conflict or heightened emotion, or before you finalize a transaction, force yourself to run it through the sieve.
Just take a beat.
Take a 3-second pause and ask yourself, is what I am about to say structurally sound? Or is there a nail of deceit wedged in here? Am I trying to manipulate the outcome?
Or am I holding a secret that I am about to carelessly release for the sake of a quick laugh?
Exactly. Taking that microscopic pause to sift your words can save you years of relational rebuilding.
It is a really powerful discipline, and it's fascinating how Ben-Sira takes this intense internal vigilance, this policing of our motives and speech, and extends it outward into how we physically occupy space in social settings.
Oh, this is a great transition.
Because this might be one of my favorite parts of the text. Ben-Sira suddenly shifts from being a high-minded philosopher to essentially acting as the Emily Post of the ancient Near East.
It's so true. Chapter 32 is entirely dedicated to the highly specific, rigid rules for attending a dinner party.
Which is just, it's so unexpected.
This is where we see the Greek influence really shining through. He is giving advice on how to survive and thrive at a Hellenistic symposium.
Right, those wine and philosophy banquets.
Exactly. These weren't just casual dinners. These were the premier networking events, the social media platforms, and the power centers of the ancient world.
So the stakes were high.
Very high. They featured wine, professional musicians, and structured philosophical debate. How you behaved at a symposium dictated your political and social standing in the city.
He starts with advice for the host, or what he calls the master of a feast, and it is surprisingly humble.
Yeah, what does he say?
He says, "If thou be made the master of a feast, lift not thyself up, but be among them as one of the rest. Take diligent care for them, and so sit down."
I love that.
It is this beautiful early concept of servant leadership. The host isn't supposed to sit on a throne and demand attention. The host is the invisible engine facilitating everyone else's comfort.
And when he pivots to the guests, his advice is entirely centered on restraint.
Which must have been hard, right?
The social pressure to sound smart at these banquets must have been immense. But Ben-Sira advises the younger guests, "Speak, young man, if there be need of thee, and yet scarcely then thou art twice asked. Let thy speech be short, comprehending much in few words. Be as one that knoweth, and yet holdeth his tongue.
Be as one that knoweth and yet holdeth his tongue. I mean, that is the ultimate quiet power move.
It really is.
You know the answer, but you don't feel the neurotic need to prove it to the room.
Right. You're secure in your knowledge.
But the absolute peak of his dinner party etiquette is his advice on music and conversation. He says, pour not out words where there is a musician. A concert of music in a banquet of wine is as a signet of carbuncles set in gold.
I love the aesthetic appreciation in that verse.
It's so poetic. What's a carbuncle exactly?
A carbuncle in the ancient world referred to a deep red gemstone, usually a garnet or a ruby. Set in polished gold, it is visually mesmerizing.
Oh, it's gorgeous.
Ben-Sira is comparing the auditory beauty of music, combined with the warmth of wine, to the visual brilliance of a precious jewel.
And what's the lesson there?
He's urging his students to have the humility to simply appreciate beauty without feeling the compulsion to dominate the room with their own voice.
Pour not out words where there is a musician. Think about how desperately we need this advice right now.
Oh, more than ever.
We are living in a profound crisis of attention. If we translate this ancient symposium to the 21st century, think about what it looks like to pour out words over the music.
What comes to mind for you?
It's being at a dinner party and checking your phone under the table while your partner is talking. It's sitting at a live concert and watching the entire thing through the screen of your phone as you record it, rather than actually experiencing it.
Yeah, missing the moment entirely.
Or worse, talking over a friend when they are trying to share a vulnerable story because you are just waiting for your turn to speak.
It fundamentally comes down to a lack of reverence for the present moment. Ben-Sira is teaching the discipline of active silence.
Active silence.
We often think of silence as a negative space, just the absence of noise. But active silence is the presence of attention. It takes immense discipline to just sit and listen.
So think about your next social gathering. Think about the last time you were out with friends. Did you feel the need to constantly fill the air?
It's a common trap.
The modern superpower isn't having the most entertaining story to tell. It's the discipline of stepping back. Be the master of the feast, even if you aren't the host, by asking questions that draw other people out.
That's brilliant.
And when someone else is playing their music, whether they're telling a joke, sharing a frustration, or just expressing themselves, practice active silence. Don't plan your witty response in your head. Just listen to the concert.
It fundamentally shifts the energy of a room from a competition for attention to a shared communion.
Now, as much as I love Ben-Sira's advice on dinner parties and keeping secrets, we have to shift gears.
Okay, bracing myself.
Because we have been praising his wisdom, but we are about to hit a wall. In chapters 25, 26, and 42, we run into some incredibly rocky, deeply uncomfortable terrain.
Yes, we do.
We have to look at his views on gender, marriage, and daughters. And I'll be honest, as a modern reader, this section makes me want to throw the book across the room.
It is undeniably the most challenging, alienating section of the text. The sources contain views that are harshly patriarchal, paranoid, and deeply biased.
Let me just quote the text so we aren't sugarcoating it. In chapter 25, he writes, "Any wickedness, only not the wickedness of a woman."
Yikes.
He claims that a bad wife makes a man's face fall and his heart bleed. In chapter 26, he says a headstrong woman will be regarded as a dog.
It's really rough to read.
And then in chapter 42, there is this agonizingly long section detailing a father's intense, almost pathological anxiety over his daughter. He views her entirely as a liability.
A source of constant stress.
He worries she won't be married, or she will be defiled, or she will bring him public shame before his enemies. It is incredibly hard to want to take life advice from someone with this worldview.
And you absolutely shouldn't excuse or sanitize it. This is where we have to practice critical discernment. As analysts, we have to look at this impartially as a historical artifact.
Okay, so help us do that. What is the context?
Ben-Sira is writing from within a deeply entrenched ancient Near Eastern framework. In the 2nd century BC, society was not organized around individual rights. It was organized around the survival of the patriarchal household.
Okay, unpack that. Why was the household structure so rigid?
Because the margins for survival were razor thin. There was no social safety net. A family's survival depended entirely on land inheritance, reliable alliances through marriage, and the preservation of public honor.
So honor wasn't just about ego, it was about survival.
Exactly. In this system, women were largely viewed through the lens of property transmission and family stability. A daughter's purity and a wife's submission were considered the literal glue holding the social and economic fabric together.
Wow!
If a woman acted outside those boundaries, it wasn't just viewed as a personal modern expression of independence. The ancient mind viewed it as an existential threat to the economic survival and honor of the entire family.
So his fear is rooted in the fragility of his society's structure. That context helps explain it, but it doesn't make it any less offensive to a modern sensibility.
No, it doesn't.
So what do we do with this? If we are trying to extract wisdom, do we just take a black marker and redact these chapters? Or is there an underlying human reality he is trying to articulate underneath all this ancient cultural armor?
If we throw the book across the room, we do lose a profound underlying truth.
What's the truth?
Strip away the ancient gender hierarchy, and what Ben-Sira is actually circling around is the terrifying, life-altering power of our primary relationships. He is describing how the person you bind your life to has the absolute power to either destroy your internal peace or elevate your entire existence.
Let's look at how he describes the positive side of that equation, because he also pens some of the most beautiful praises of a supportive partner in ancient literature.
Yes, he does.
He writes, "A silent and loving woman is a gift of the Lord. As the sun when it ariseth in the high heaven, so is the beauty of a good wife in the ordering of her house."
The imagery is striking.
And my absolute favorite line, "Happy is the husband of a good wife, for the number of his years is doubled."
The number of his years is doubled. That is a stunning observation, and it is psychologically and physiologically astute.
Really? How so?
If we translate this to the 21st century, stripped entirely of its patriarchal bias, the core insight remains absolutely true for any human partnership, regardless of gender.
Because he's pointing out the biological reality of living with another person.
Exactly. He uses a metaphor in chapter 25 for a toxic relationship. He that hath hold of her is as though he held a scorpion.
Imagine holding a scorpion. You are terrified it will strike at any moment.
Yes. Living in a home filled with constant conflict, suspicion, and walking on eggshells keeps your nervous system in a perpetual state of fight or flight.
You are flooded with cortisol.
It wears down your immune system. It literally shortens your life.
But a supportive, harmonious partnership is like the sun rising in the high heaven.
It provides warmth and predictability. It acts as a buffer against the chaos of the outside world. Modern science completely backs this up.
Wow, really?
Positive, secure attachments reduce stress hormones, lower blood pressure, and improve cardiovascular health. A good partner literally does double your days.
This forces us into some deep self-reflection. When we read ancient warnings about toxic behavior, our immediate instinct is to project it outward.
All right, we point the finger.
We instantly think of our difficult ex-partner or a terrible roommate we once had. We read the scorpion metaphor and think, yeah, I know a scorpion.
But true wisdom requires us to turn the mirror inward.
Exactly. Think about your closest partnerships right now. Your spouse, your romantic partner, your business partner. Are you a source of peace and sunlight to them? Or are you a source of turmoil?
That's a tough question to ask yourself.
When they hear your key in the front door, does their nervous system relax or does it tense up? Do you act like the scorpion, bringing constant, unpredictable sting to the environment?
Right. Are you the one causing the cortisol spike?
Cultivating a shared space that acts as a true refuge from the furnace of the world is one of the most profound responsibilities we have.
That is how you read a difficult text with discernment. You refuse to swallow the ancient cultural poison, but you carefully extract the psychological medicine.
Well said.
And Ben-Sira's tendency to categorize the world into strict hierarchies doesn't stop with the household. He extends it to the economy, which leads us to his highly controversial views on the value of human labor.
Oh, this is the grand debate in chapters 38 and 39, the scribe versus the artisan, who actually builds the world.
This section gives us an incredibly detailed, vivid look into the civic economy of ancient Jerusalem.
What does he say?
Ben-Sira explicitly contrasts the wisdom of the scribe, which happens to be his own elite profession, with the manual labor of the craftsman. And the way he describes the physical toll of these jobs is remarkably poetic and observant.
Yeah, he specifically mentions the agricultural laborer whose entire life is focused on guiding the plow and whose talk is of bullocks.
Right.
He talks about the engraver of signets working late into the night, and I love his description of the smith sitting by the anvil considering the unwrought iron. The text says, "The vapor of the fire wasteth his flesh, and he fighteth with the heat of the furnace. The noise of the hammer and the anvil is ever in his ears."
He also describes the potter sitting at his work, turning the wheel about with his feet, carefully applying the glaze. Ben-Sira clearly spent time watching these men work.
He respects the physical effort.
He observes the sweat, the soot, and the sheer physical exhaustion of the trades.
But his ultimate conclusion about these manual laborers is a massive, frustrating paradox.
It really is.
On one hand, he freely admits that they are the absolute backbone of civilization. He writes, "Without these cannot a city be inhabited, and they shall not dwell where they will, nor go up and down. They will maintain the state of the world."
He admits that without the plumber, the builder, and the farmer, society collapses.
But in the very next breath, he insists that because their bodies are exhausted by labor, their minds cannot comprehend true wisdom.
Which is, it's a stark turn.
He writes, "They shall not be sought for in public council, nor sit high in the congregation. They shall not sit on the judge's seat, nor understand the sentence of judgment, and they shall not be found where parables are spoken."
It's incredibly dismissive.
Wait, I am struggling with this. On one hand, he's saying civilization literally cannot exist without the tradesmen, but in the next breath, he's essentially saying they aren't smart enough to govern or understand deep philosophy.
That's exactly what he's saying.
How did his ancient audience not see the massive hypocrisy and elitism in that?
Well, we have to look at the sociology of the scribal class. In ancient Jerusalem, scribes were not just menial copyists. They were a wealthy, leisured nobility, often drawn from the priesthood.
So they were the elite.
Yes. They were the diplomats, the lawyers, the judges, and the theologians of the state. They firmly believed that acquiring true, divine wisdom required one vital resource: leisure.
Leisure? As in free time?
Yes. The Greek word for leisure is skol, which is where we get the word school.
Oh, wow, I didn't know that.
Ben-Sira believed that to become wise, you needed the free time to study the ancient laws, the wealth to travel and observe foreign cultures, and the quiet space to meditate.
So it was a luxury.
Exactly. In his worldview, if you are deafened by the noise of the anvil all day and your back is broken from the plow, you simply do not have the bandwidth for intellectual pursuits.
Yeah.
It was an incredibly elitist, class-based view of human potential.
I'm going to reject that entirely.
I don't blame you.
The idea that physical labor lacks wisdom is a profound, arrogant blind spot in his worldview. There is a deep physical intelligence, a somatic wisdom in the hands of a master carpenter or a skilled metalworker that a purely intellectual scribe sitting in a quiet courtyard might never understand.
Oh, absolutely.
True wisdom isn't just reciting ancient law, it's knowing how to shape the physical world.
I completely agree. The prejudice is glaring.
Yeah.
And yet, before we judge Ben-Sira too harshly, we have to look at our own society.
What do you mean?
If we translate this ancient divide to the 21st century, we see the exact same hierarchy playing out right in front of us. We just use different labels.
Oh, I see where you're going. It's the modern divide between knowledge workers and essential workers.
Exactly. The modern scribes are the knowledge workers. They work on laptops and coffee shops. They design software. They consult. They analyze data.
They have the modern equivalent of school.
Right. Flexible hours, remote work, the mental space to listen to a deep dive on ancient philosophy while typing.
And the modern artisans are the mechanics, the delivery drivers, the agricultural workers, the plumbers, the electricians. Society depends entirely on them.
Just like Ben-Sira said, without them, a city cannot be inhabited.
We saw this perfectly during global lockdowns. If the knowledge workers take a week off, some emails don't get answered, and a marketing deck is delayed.
But if the essential workers take a week off,
the supply chains freeze, the trash piles up in the streets, the power grid fails, and civilization halts. They literally maintain the state of the world.
And yet, how does our society reward them? Do we put them on the covers of magazines? Do we pay them the highest salaries?
No. We reserve the highest prestige, the most wealth, and the modern judges' seats for the scribes, the tech CEOs, and the hedge fund managers.
We often pretend we are an egalitarian society that values all work equally. But our economic structures tell the exact same story as Ben-Sira's ancient texts.
He just had the audacity to say it out loud.
Pretty much.
So how do we push back against this in our own lives? Think about the invisible infrastructure that makes your day possible. When you turned on the tap this morning, clean water came out because someone maintained the municipal pipes.
You drove on paved roads.
Your garbage magically disappeared from the curb. Who are the modern artisans maintaining the fabric of your daily existence? Have you ever actually considered the somatic wisdom required to keep the power grid running?
It's immense.
We can actively choose to show the reverence and respect to manual labor that ancient society, and often our own society, so casually withholds.
It requires a fundamental shift in how we measure the worth of a human being. Wisdom is found just as often at the anvil and the plow as it is in the boardroom or the university.
We have covered so much ground today. We've looked at the tension between the Sadducees and Pharisees in the margins, the tension between the buyer and the seller, the tension between the scribe and the artisan.
It's a very tense book.
And this constant theme of different forces balancing each other out brings us to Ben-Sira's ultimate overarching philosophical conclusion about the universe itself in chapters 42 and 43.
He zooms out from the microscopic view of human society and looks at the vastness of nature and divine providence. And he arrives at a profound, almost cosmic worldview.
What does he write?
He writes, "All things are double one against another, and he hath made nothing imperfect."
All things are double one against another. It is this beautiful concept of a grand duality, a delicate, intentional system of balance.
Right, light and dark.
Good and evil, health and sickness, summer and winter. The universe is a system of counterweights.
Yes, the expert commentary highlights that this is Ben-Sira's way of dealing with the profound problem of human suffering. If God is good, why is life so hard?
That's the eternal question.
Ben-Sira's answer is that everything has a counterbalance. And what is truly remarkable is that when we look at this section, we can see traces of broader, global human wisdom traditions bleeding into the text. He is tapping into something universal.
What other traditions? Are we talking about Greek philosophy again?
Yes, there are distinct traces of Hellenistic and Epicurean philosophy regarding how to live cheerfully in a difficult world.
Epicureanism, that's usually associated with hedonism, right?
Often. But it wasn't just about hedonism. It was about minimizing pain and finding tranquil joy. Ben-Sira echoes this, talking about how gladness prolongeth days, and urging the reader to entice thyself and soothe thine heart and banish vexation from thee.
But scholars have traced this pursuit of balanced cheerfulness back even further, right?
They have drawn direct parallels between Ben-Sira's advice and a fragment of the ancient epic of Gilgamesh.
Wait, Gilgamesh, as in the ancient Mesopotamian king, that is a massive leap in time and geography.
It is. We're talking about a Babylonian cuneiform tablet dating back to around 2000 BC, nearly 2,000 years before Ben-Sira lived.
That's incredible.
The Gilgamesh epic contains an incredibly poignant scene where an alewife gives the hero advice on mortality. The Babylonian text tells him to banish sorrow, let his belly be full, enjoy the feast, and find joy in the wife of your youth, because human life is short.
So Ben-Sira, in 180 BC Jerusalem, is echoing the exact same sentiment as a Babylonian poet in 2000 BC.
Yes. It shows us that the pursuit of a balanced, cheerful heart in the face of life's crushing struggles is a universal human quest.
Humanity has been passing the exact same notes to each other across millennia.
Exactly. Life is terribly short, the world is full of scorpions and hardship, but try to find the counterbalance. Eat good food, banish vexation, cherish your partner.
That brings so much comfort. To the modern listener, facing an absolute tidal wave of daily anxiety, 247 news cycles of doom, and global uncertainty, this concept of the grand duality is an anchor. It's the law of conservation of balance.
If the universe is a system of counterweights, it means that when things feel overwhelmingly, suffocatingly dark, a counterbalance of light must exist in the system, even if it is currently hidden from your view.
So here is how you can apply this cosmic duality today. When you are facing a severe negative in your life, a sudden job loss, a painful heartbreak, a chronic illness, the pain is real. We don't minimize the pain.
No, the pain is valid.
But can you step back from the blinding immediacy of that pain and actively look for its double? What is the counterweight? What is the hidden opportunity for deep empathy or the forced redirection of your life's path that the universe has provided alongside this hardship?
Because the darkness isn't the entire story.
There is always a double. You just have to be willing to look for the counterweight.
It is a profound mechanism for human resilience. You don't ignore the tragedy. You refuse to let it be the only weight on the scale.
We have been on an absolute odyssey today. We started by stepping into the dusty, forgotten Cairo Geniza, unearthing a lost text that survived a millennium in the dark.
We watched rival scribes battle over the theology of the afterlife, injecting their own beliefs into the margins of the manuscript.
We explored the rigorous economy of words, the hidden nail of deceit wedged between buying and selling, and the escaped bird of betrayed trust that can never be recaptured.
We sat at the Hellenistic feast, learning to respect the music and practice active silence in a world addicted to noise.
We confronted the harsh patriarchal biases of the ancient world, looking past the cultural armor to extract the timeless truth that our closest relationships act as either a toxic, cortisol-spiking scorpion or a life-giving, life-extending sun.
We challenge the ancient elitism of the scribe to honor the somatic wisdom of the artisan, recognizing the invisible essential workers who truly maintain the state of the world.
And we arrived at the grand duality, the ancient universal comfort spanning from Babylon to Jerusalem, that all things are beautifully balanced one against another.
It's an incredible journey.
And that leads me to a final thought I want to leave you with. We talked at the beginning about how the text of Sirach was constantly edited and argued over.
Right, the Wikipedia edit war.
The Sadducees and the Pharisees each tried to inject their own truth into Ben-Sira's legacy, adding lines about the afterlife or repentance because they felt the original text was missing something crucial. The book was a living document, subject to the revisions of those who came after.
It absorbed the fingerprints of everyone who touched it.
So imagine the book of your own life's wisdom, the values you hold, the advice you give, the way you treat people, the way you are currently living right now. If someone were to find the manuscript of your life 100 years from now and a rival faction were to edit it, what crucial truth would they find missing?
Oh, it's a good question.
What would they look at in your life and feel absolutely compelled to add in the margins? Would they need to add more joy, more stillness, more reverence for the people who serve you, less anxiety? What is the missing verse in your wisdom?
That is a question worth carrying with you.
That's the heart of this section. This is Wisdom for the Present, where understanding leads to clarity, and clarity shapes how we see and live. We'll see you in the next episode.